I think they're slightly different situations, and in some respects, Andy hasn't got anyone to learn from because of that, because it is a whole new set of circumstances and it is a huge jeopardy for him personally.
Now let's continue the conversation about Andy Burnham's potential return to the Commons, which would enable him in turn and in theory to become Prime Minister. He wouldn't be the first to transition from mayoralty to Downing Street, because that was pretty much Boris Johnson's route. We can speak to Joe Tanner, who led the communications strategy for Boris Johnson's mayoral campaign back in 2008. Morning, Joe.
Good morning.
Do you think Andy Burnham can learn from Boris Johnson?
Oh, gosh. I'm not sure if Andy Burnham would say he was learning anything from Boris Johnson. It's a different set of circumstances, let's face it. The prospect of a by-election versus standing in a general election. And actually the difference with Boris was his term was coming to an end. So it was a different set of circumstances to some extent, the way that Boris was returning to politics, to frontline politics in Westminster. So I suppose in some respect, in a way, perhaps Burnham had already learnt from Boris, because Boris had already done if you think about it, Boris's journey is something that Andy has almost followed already, in that he was an MP and then left to go into a mayoralty. And the coming back is the bit where I have to say, I think Burnham's got a really difficult choice to make, because let alone what's going to go on with the NEC, which you've already been talking about, there's the pressure that if he doesn't win, not only has he lost his original job, but is he going to get blamed for being a huge distraction during a set of local elections that Labour are already set to do badly in? And in addition, what is his narrative going to be for that campaign? The difference with Boris was that although Boris was a thorn in the side for the Conservative Party for some time, it was mainly because he'd sort of made his own mistakes and he didn't quite challenge the leadership in quite the same way that Andy has been. It was often around things like the European Union, or there were elements of policy. The problem with where Andy's got to, it was very much friction, and then it sort of spilt over because of what happened at party conference last year. So I think they're slightly different situations, and in some respects, Andy hasn't got anyone to learn from because of that, because it is a whole new set of circumstances and it is a huge jeopardy for him personally.
Yeah, because of course Boris Johnson, because rules allowed it, meant that he was able to be mayor of London at the same time as being MP. So there was no personal risk there. If he'd stood to be MP and hadn't been successful, he was still mayor of London. But NEC rules, the Labour National Executive Committee rules, say that you can't do both jobs. So Andy Burnham would have to walk away from Greater Manchester, where he is the mayor, and is generally, I mean, not everyone will think this, but generally, if you speak to people and if you look at the votes that he got at the mayoral election, it is widely seen as pretty popular there.
Yeah, and he is ultimately, let's face it, he's sort of the face of Manchester. I'm sure plenty of other MPs in the Greater Manchester area won't necessarily like that, but he is the man that the minute there is something involving, even to some extent, several areas in the north, Andy has been seen as the most vocal, one of the biggest champions. He gets a considerably more attention than someone like Steve Rotherham in Liverpool, and he has been willing to sort of speak out. It's not even just about the leadership and his ability to speak out. You have to remember, on things like Hillsborough, he was a huge champion of the Hillsborough families. On things like the infected blood scandal, he was leading the charge on that. You'll have heard him repeatedly with the Sunday Times political editor Caroline Wheeler, who led the sort of work on that from sort of the press side. Andy was one of the most vocal individuals politically on that, and I actually pushed his own government considerably around compensation schemes and what was going on with regards to how those victims and those affected were being treated. And so he's taken really principled stances. And that is also a challenge, because the problem with this campaign is that, particularly if they run it alongside those local elections, he's going to be standing as a Labour candidate. He's going to have to toe the party line, or risk dividing, the sort of the foot soldiers on the ground. And he's going to essentially be distracting the whole campaign for everybody, no matter what seat, you've got a local candidate in. If you've got a local MP turning out, or a cabinet minister making a visit to somewhere, they're launching their local election campaign. You've got Andy's narrative, which has got to fit in with the general party narrative. It is a bit of a nightmare for, the sort of party figures, number 10, all of those, to actually manage. You'd almost have to try and come to a truce to sort of, look, can you just get in and we'll deal with whether you want the job after that, please? Because you don't want to screw it up for the rest of your party. If you do that, he could be an MP, but he'd have no chance. Even if he won that seat, he could still have a chance of having upset so many individuals
within that party. Jo, really interesting to speak to you. Thank you for coming on this morning. That's Jo Tanner there, who led the communication strategy for Boris Johnson's mayoral campaign back in 2008.
2008.